This is Villain for All Seasons. I'm Andrew.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Ben. This week we sat down with journalist Ryan Grimm. Ryan is a co-host of Counterpoints on the Breaking Points channel. He is also a co-founder of Dropsite News with Jeremy Scahill.
How's it going, Ryan?
Good, good. How about go birds?
Yeah.
Fly, Eagles fly. Um, well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Dan. I'll let the other guys introduce themselves as well.
Oh yeah, Ben. Hi.
Yeah. And I'm Andrew.
Hey guys.
And we are the host of Villain for All Seasons. So again, thank you for joining us. And let's just get right into it. Um, Ryan, I want to just kick things off talking about DOGE. And something that we've been talking about on the podcast is how much of DOGE is a perceived victory for Elon, Trump, etc., and how much is really just like fulfilling this promise made on the campaign trail.
Well, it depends on which promises we're talking about on the campaign trail. The polling is showing that, I don't know if that's the question you're asking, but the polling is showing that public support for it is theoretically very high. Like you ask somebody if there should be an audit of federal spending. If you found anybody saying no to that, you get their head checked. I think if you look at some of the polling around, does Elon Musk have too much power? That is coming back way, way, way underwater for Musk and for Trump. You'll say, how much power does Elon Musk have? And people will say, a lot, a whole lot in polls. And they'll say, how much power do you want him to have? And they will say much less. There's something about him that is kind of scaring the public off a little bit. The young hackers like monkeying around in the bowels of the Treasury that has people nervous. We'll see how popular getting rid of CFPB is. Going after the education department is going to scare a lot of people who have, I don't know, you guys look kind of young. I got kids in school. A lot of the parents that I know have kids with an IEP, which is an individual education plan. You guys went through schools. You probably know what those are. The federal government mandates that schools pay special attention to kids who have special needs. I think 15 million kids are currently in an IEP right now. So that's a lot of you're talking about at scale there. So probably scary to people. On the other hand, I'm conflicted in the whole thing because when I see him going after USAID, I'm like, oh my God, bring it. You guys are. Do you know what you're going after here? Because if you're going after it for this reasons, if you're going after it because of what it actually does, that's what the kids would call based. You're taking on the heart, the beating heart of the kind of American empire there. I also I've started to bore myself by saying I like this thing that you're doing, but this is not how I would do it or why I would do it because the populist left did not win. So it's of course they're not going to do it the way I think they should or for the reasons I think they should. So I guess in some cases I'm just enjoying where there's overlap. And then I get nervous about where it goes because it's okay, you say you're shutting down USAID and I've refused to call it USAID. USAID is
deceptive.
It's a trick of a name.
Yeah.
It's to make you think that it's a humanitarian aid organization. It is USAID. And because it is not an aid organization, it is an implementing agency for many important aid projects like PEPFAR, for instance. But you could do PEPFAR without USAID. PEPFAR is the HIV program, which I think, should continue, do it through the UN, team up with China, whatever, or make it a trade policy where you're giving cheap drugs. Just make sure that people who need HIV medication are able to get HIV medication somehow. Doesn't mean it has to be part of a global regime change operation. I'm okay, great. You're getting rid of USAID, but then Rubio says he's going to bring it under the State Department and it's going to continue its mission, but it's going to do so in an America First way and in the interests of the United States. So does that mean it just picks different horses in the Romanian election? Where it used to back the establishment candidates in the Romanian election. Now it's going to back like the populist right. Well, that creates a conflict with the deep state because the populist right in Europe is pretty aligned with Russia. So it'd be weird if that's what the U.S. ended up spending its money doing, like let Russia do that. But maybe it does because we've become partisan in our kind of global politics. I don't know. How are you guys feeling about it?
We talked a bit about it at length in our little banter episode. We rattled off most of like the operations that were a bit more nefarious. I don't know if you guys want to add to
with
that.
with USAID. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm pro the idea of getting rid of USAID for the reasons that you have there. And I have that was the same question I had when it happened was like, does Elon Musk understand like what that is? Because, if it seems like if you were looking for a way to get assassinated by the CIA, this would be a very good
Yes.
this would be a very good step towards doing it. So I guess also in that, like I keep going back and forth with the whole Doge conversation of wondering how, like, two parts, like how much is it Elon Musk just being self-serving and how much he, if at all, is an ideologue about any of these implementations that he's doing, and also just how much they actually know about who they're targeting, or if it's really just going by vibes. Like you've done
Yeah.
some good reporting on this. It seems like they're just looking at a ledger and they see things they don't like and they're like, cut it.
It's hard to know, how much of the kind of babe in the woods stuff is real.
Mhm.
Every time he tweets, wow, like did he really just learn that thing? That seems
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah. Crazy
Um,
if true.
Crazy if true,
Okay.
but it's also a brilliant way to pull in the public, to like bring them along on a fact-finding mission, an analysis mission, where they are collectively going through the files and rooting out the corruption. That you've seen a lot of people say, after all of the revelations that have been made by the DOGE committee or agency or whatever it is, now we know X. And you don't want to be this like know-it-all kid who's like, this USA spending.gov, like, or read our previous reporting, like this is, or read a book, or like they didn't uncover any of this. But you don't want to, you sound like such a jerk when you do that.
Mhm.
And they certainly have shined a spotlight on it in a way that it wasn't before. And yeah, they're going in places that would be dangerous in general for people to go. But yeah, then they do a lot of stupid stuff, which is like discovering that government agencies have subscriptions to Politico Pro, or that the Pentagon has like a contract with the New York Times, for service members to be able to read the New York Times or whatever. Maybe you don't like that and get rid of it, but like that's a benefit that these service members have, and maybe you think it should be cut, then go ahead and cut it. It's fine. But like it's not a gigantic, scheme to
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
fund the New York Times. And like it then led to this claim, I just find it impossible to believe that it's going to actually happen. But this claim that the Treasury Department was going to immediately like cut its contract with Bloomberg, which was providing it like real-time data on like bond information.
Hmm.
Like you imagine like we have $30 trillion in debt circulating around the world that we are responsible for servicing and trading and we're going to, and Bloomberg has this very sophisticated tool that keeps you updated in a real-time way on movements on the 1 year note, the 2 year note, the 10 year note, 30 years, and the various spreads around the world. And we're going to shut off the Treasury Department from being able to see that. Like, does anybody think that the United States, America first, is going to benefit from that? So like that kind of stuff, you're like going. But then again, like I annoy myself, like I'm like, well, you didn't win. These guys won. And this is how they
Yeah.
want to do it.
It is
I
funny
don't.
because you're like watching what's happening right now as someone, who's nominally on the left. It's
Mhm.
it's it's infuriating because, you know, in my perfect world,
Right.
if Bernie had
Yes.
won or
Yeah.
something, he would be doing this. Like
Right.
I'm getting to watch the other side do what I wish my side would do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a bummer.
And so I want them to do it like my side would do, but of
Yeah.
course they're not going to.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
right, that brings up a good point, Ryan. Do you think that is an eventual outcome after seeing what Trump has done, or do you think when the pendulum swings back, Democrats eventually take back the White House, etc., that they will govern them in the same way that Biden did the last 4 years? Or do you think that Trump has opened up a new way of governance?
It really depends what happens as a result of what Trump is doing and who comes back into power as a result. Like I don't think that these guys are in power permanently, as some liberals seem to think. If they fall on their face and the Hakeem Jeffries wing of the Democratic Party takes back power, I would not actually expect them to embrace, Muskian a Muskian approach to government. I would expect them to kind of revert back to the more Biden-like
Mm.
approach, and because one of the things they would have run on would be norms and
Yeah.
such. If Trump and Musk like actually break the thing and cause some huge global economic crisis, and that somehow ushers in whatever new iteration of a Sanders wing forms, then I would think that you would get a more Muskian approach. Or like, no, we're doing this. Like we're just gonna make moves and let the system sort it out afterwards, because we'll see that, which is what they're doing. Like we're in the very front end of this, and so all we're seeing is them making moves, and we're not seeing yet how the system is fully responding to it, and how they are going to then respond to how the system responds to it.
Mhm.
Just today, I don't know when you're airing this, but it's Monday afternoon. Another judge just reiterated that this funding freeze is unconstitutional, and you are required to spend this money on the NIH, on the Inflation Reduction Act projects. Like you must spend the money, but they fired the Treasury guy who would normally press the buttons to effectuate that ruling. So now who presses those buttons? And like Musk is not going to press the buttons. He seems very much in a you've made your order, now you press the buttons kind of mood. And so we don't know where that goes.
I talk about this a lot just because it's so surprising to me. If this were 2016, you have public and private companies freaking out, completely in shock. Hashtag resistance, right? And I feel like it's now hashtag resignation.
hmm
What has happened? Like, what is this acquiescence? This bended knee?
I think it's not, there's not a, I think there is some acquiescence when it comes to the public. And I think part of that is from him winning an actual popular vote and not coming in like a fluke who looks like he's about to be, ejected by the system. But I think another part of it is the structural power of the center left media, particularly CNN and MSNBC. That's the filter through which all of us kind of understand what the democratic reaction is to what's going on. Like what are CNN and MSNBC saying it is? And both of them, for reasons of corporate power, and more so their kind of broader corporate interests than they're just profit from these small entities, they've been muzzled. They've been significantly muzzled. And also Twitter is now in the hands of Elon Musk rather than as it was in 2017 in the hands of Jack Dorsey, and there was a real kind of left of center not capture, but like dominance of the discourse on Twitter. And so you just, with CNN neutered and all the resistance people kicked out, with MSNBC being, cut off and spun out, and with all of the resistance people on Blue Sky, like it's very hard for them to kind of develop the appearance of a resistance, even though
Mm.
individually speaking, rank and file Democrats are fired up and doing stuff and going to meetings and just calling Congress and writing letters, and they didn't march as high numbers as they did in 2017, but they're marching, like they're out there. But because of the structure of how we're receiving that information, it's just not coming through.
Just because none of us went on Blue Sky, I forgot about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but it's
I was
there,
just
it's popping. Go on over there, and you will be like, "Whoa, these guys they are not laying down." But what are they yelling at? They're in their own
Yeah.
room.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's the
Yelling at
danger
each
of it.
other.
That's what they always wanted, right? Is just have all
They
the
got
Nazi
it.
shit on Twitter, and
Hmm.
then now you got blue sky for everybody else, and it's more fun if
Yeah.
everybody agrees with you.
Ryan, I wanted to talk about the media companies real quick. We've had some major settlements with Trump. We had the ABC settlement, now the CBS, and of course MSNBC. You have Micah and Joe going to Mar-a-Lago. I hate to beat on it about this. I just feel like I have to ask, just because again, it's so interesting to me. Do you have any takes on those beyond what you
Yeah.
already said?
Yeah. I very much feel like um, the parent companies of these media organizations are doing everything they can to kiss up to Trump for various corporate acquisition and merger reasons, and also fear of whatever Trump might do, and that these lawsuits uh, appear to be a very clever way of legalizing bribery. Like it's genius. It's even smarter because it's on a grander scale than Hunter Biden becoming a painter, which was genius because who's going to say that's
Forgot
not
about
worth
that.
who's going to say that's not a $500,000 painting?
And
Like if
I thought
this,
they
Yeah.
were pretty
oh,
good. I don't know.
they were great. They were
I
wonderful. It was
I
five
only have
hundred
a few of
grand.
his NFTs, so
Yeah.
And like I had, was he even painting them, or did he just come in and like finish and whatever? Like, it, so that
That's
was
that's your conspiracy theory. Yeah,
that's my
sorry, go ahead.
conspiracy theory. He was pumping them out, and now they've burned down in the LA fires. Apparently, like one of his main buyers, they all
Oh
burned.
no.
hmm.
Imagine being the
I hope you
insurance
got that
company.
insured. Yeah.
The insurance company is like, seriously, I owe you
Yeah.
$500,000 for this.
You're
So
Hunter Biden's.
yeah, so that was a brilliant scheme. This one's so much better. So you and you don't even have to work it out with the company. The company just understands what's happening here. You sue them, and the CBS one is the most absurd. Like, I'm suing you because I don't like the way you edited this interview with Kamala Harris. Like, first of all, how do you have standing to sue as his her opponent who beat her? Like,
Hmm.
what's
Yeah,
what
also that's the craziest thing. It's like you won. You
you
didn't
won?
like it's
What's
not
your
like this
harm?
hurt you.
Like for a lawsuit, you need harm. Like
Yeah.
you were angry when you watched the interview, and that's your harm. Like that doesn't
Uh,
count. And it's also like they've put the transcript out. It's so far within the standard of how these interviews are cut. They could go back and look at. They're like, oh, they took the word salad and turned it into like a nice fruit salad. It's
Hmm.
like no, like okay, yes, they did, but that happens all the time if you take a long answer and you truncate it down to like two sentences. Take any Trump interview from the last several years that is done by like a 60 minutes. They will ask him a question and he's going to do what he calls it the weave. When he doesn't want
Hmm.
to answer a question where he like goes,
mhm.
he's talking about sharks and electric batteries and then he's talking about she and then
Yeah.
yeah, Kim Jong
Yeah.
Un, and then they may or may not get to an answer to the question. And what 60 Minutes would do is they would not run that entire question answer. They pick out the part that's relevant. Like that's when you write an article, you don't quote. If I interview somebody for a half an hour, I don't put every single thing the guy said to me in the conversation into the article. I make an editorial decision. So
Hmm.
the idea that you could sue and get damages over an editorial decision like that is like on its face preposterous. So clearly something else is going on here. And and CBS is like willingness to entertain this and we may end up with a settlement. Like there's some settlements that have been reached that were equally absurd from what was it, Facebook and ABC.
Meta, yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, okay, that is a company that is putting cash into the hands of a powerful politician, in this case, the president of the United States, and this company wants something from that politician. Like they're not putting it in a bag or an envelope and like sliding it across the desk, like we understand bribes to be, but
Hmm.
they're just doing it right out in the open and wiring it into his account and making him happy, and
Mhm.
and then he's going to go shake down all these other places for the same thing. It's brilliant, but it just feels pretty transparently like bribery to me. Which, by the way, somebody was making a good point on Twitter. The Chinese system before Xi did his like corruption shakedown was very efficient. Like efficient is an interesting word at the end of DOGE there. Um, Paying a bribe to a council member or to a mayor and getting the contract is extraordinarily efficient. Like that's, or just hiring your best friend to do the job. Like that's efficient.
Hmm.
Anybody who's done hiring knows what a pain in the ass it is to put up a job listing, to go through all the interviews. If you could just hand it to somebody, like that's actually much more efficient. There's a reason it's called like the Government Accountability Office, not the Government Efficiency Office. Like, and accountability and transparency are often, sometimes, in conflict with efficiency. Um, but that, that's kind of a different question. But for Facebook to just bribe, for Meta to just bribe the president, that's efficient. That
Hmm.
is, yeah, and then get it whatever it wants. That's efficiency.
Well, and he's very bribable. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't think there's any president who's ever been as much on his grind
yeah,
as Donald Trump. He's always on the hustle.
yeah. And the shit coin that he did, incredible.
Oh gosh, I
Anyone?
already
Yeah,
forgot about that. It's only been like 3 weeks.
like it's like, like he just stole all that money. It's incredible.
It seemed
Yeah.
almost, it seemed like he almost forgot about it. Like that
Yeah,
was one of the moments where when he was being asked about it, and sometimes he's lying, and sometimes I feel like he's actually telling the truth. And that was one where I'm like, oh yeah, it seemed like a moment of honesty where he was like, oh yeah, I did that. Huh.
yeah.
How'd that go?
How's that doing? I gotta go check my numbers on that.
Ryan, one thing we were talking about Democratic opposition, and the most that I've seen via the media, which is, as you mentioned, really our filter for a lot of this opposition right now, is in the confirmation hearings. So I want to talk a little bit about Tulsi and RFK and how you see them playing out. We saw that Rubio flew through, Stefanik flew through, and also
Hmm.
Russell. So I just wanted to have those as the counterpoint as well to RFK and Tulsi.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they seem, yeah. I mean, everybody's cruising. Gates seems to be like the only guy that's not going to end up
The sacrificial lamb.
getting through.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people were saying that maybe they what he was doing there was putting out somebody so absurd that everybody else would seem reasonable by comparison. We'll see how you know the ones that are more divisive within Republican corners, like a Kash Patel. We'll see, if they have, he's been on the outs with Musk in the past too. We had a piece up about that recently that like he's very much in the Bannon kind of wing of the party. So like those are going to be almost more interesting than ones that have Democratic opposition. But uh, they only have 47 seats, and the Democrats do, and one of those is Fetterman, who there seems just kind of like joyfully poking Democrats in the eye. So that
Yeah.
quickly takes them down to like 46 on most of these, so that you're starting from way behind there.
Do you think that Tulsi and RFK will fly through?
I feel like they will. I feel like they'll find a way. I think they'll find a way to get RFK through, for sure. Like that's the one I'm more confident about. Tulsi is such a wild card because she's her politics have been all over the place, and they're putting her in charge of DNI, which is it's kind of incredible. And it's a raises a real question of whether the deep state or whatever you want to call it like has any fight left in it. Like if they
Mhm.
can't find four Republicans to block Tulsi, that's a remarkable statement about how back on their heels they are. But they
I
might
feel
not.
like I feel like she'd be able to play ball though. She's very
She's
anti-war
signaling that.
after the fact,
Yeah,
but
she's certainly
yeah,
signaling that she's going to play ball.
Mhm.
yeah.
Um, but and that may be enough, and maybe the
Hmm.
deep state feels like it flexed enough of its muscle to get her to flip on the whole range of things,
Yeah, because
surveillance,
isn't part
Snowden.
isn't part of that kind of getting the rhetorical wins of like, oh, we got this person who, supports Edward Snowden or says that the Iraq invasion was bad, but like actually she's just going to conduct herself like any other head of the DNI would. But then you rhetorically say, oh, look what we're doing to dismantle the deep state. Seems to be a lot
Right,
of what
right,
a
right,
lot of what they're doing.
right, and maybe that's the best they can do, given their
Mhm.
how back on their heels they are.
Well, speaking of like Ryan, I want to bring it back kind of the first question that we were talking about. Like, do you actually think Trump is dismantling the deep state, or do you think this is a lot of rhetoric?
I mean, I think it's too soon to say, and I think it depends on what you mean by the, the quote unquote deep state. But
Yeah.
he certainly is putting in place people with heterodox views on American power that would have been previously unthinkable. It's certainly at the scale that he's putting them in at, and I think that alone has a distorting effect on the kind of politics of the deep state, which I think it's probably like creating a lot more strife internally. Like the effectiveness of a deep state relies on its solidarity. Like it's a force that has been in power, president to president, and with a particular direction. Um, and if you disrupt that, then then instead you have competing factions within an administration, which is different than a deep state. So in that sense, he's eroding its power, I think, and certainly by whatever he does with USAID, like that's a real shot. That's 50 a $50 billion budget is an enormous amount of money. $1 billion a week, 10,000 employees, plus the tens of thousands of contractors downstream from that. That's an entire universe of people being cut adrift. So that's not nothing.
Ryan, I want to talk a little bit about the media too. I'm trying to remember the first time I remember hearing from you. I think it must have been on the Hill, if not, definitely the Intercept days. What do you predict for media over these next 4 years? And I mean, you touched a little bit about on like what's known as mainstream media, mainstream left media, with like MSNBC is going through troubles, CNN is going through troubles, etc. And obviously, you were host of Points, co-host of Breaking Points. What do you foresee? How do you foresee left media in general, developing over the
Yeah.
next 4 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how MSNBC and CNN try to navigate this.
Well,
With
Mattow's back.
Maddow's back, so that's going. Hayes is still going. An MSNBC that used the audience and the revenue that it has to like build up a massive kind of YouTube and social media presence
Hmm.
might be an interesting pivot for them. But they're on that cable dole, and
Hmm.
you just like the for people that don't, I mean, I'm sure you guys do, but for people don't know, like cable companies pay CNN and MSNBC just tens and tens of millions of dollars because cable customers want those channels on their cable package, and so they get $2 or $3 or $4 from every person who's on there, and that adds up to money that can, you know, build studios in 30 Rock and pay these gigantic salaries. And so there's just no comparable money on the kind of internet side, even though there's much more audience there. It's this
Right.
really fascinating paradox where, a year from now, and maybe already, like a year from now, Breaking Points might have substantially more audience than MSNBC, but MSNBC's revenue would remain, 10 times or 100 times bigger. And so as a result of that, they will just sit there forever. Because if you're the executive, like your shares and your payout is much better with a declining audience and a huge payout than a growing audience and you know
That's wild.
fewer dollars. So that will then paradoxically leave open the independent space. I think like half of people get their news basically from YouTube and podcasts now. Yet you don't have half of the media's investment in that half. like 90% of the media's investment is in the half that is old and gets it through cable because that's where the money's still pumping out of. So one day they're going to wake up and be like, "Oh crap, 10 million people a day are watching Breaking Points or whatever it is. Like, what are we going to do now?" And maybe they have enough of a brand that they can like transition because some of what I think that what we our content and like the way that we produce the news is a big part of why people watch us. But also, I think people just want like free, convenient news on YouTube or Spotify. Like,
Hmm.
and if they had something different, they would watch that. So I remind myself of that. It's like there just isn't much else there,
Mhm.
and so we'll see how long it takes people on that side of it to recognize.
I feel like Fox has done a pretty good job.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and then now they're creeping in on the Megyn Kelly thing,
Yeah.
um, which now interestingly she's like furiously clarifying that Fox does not have any ownership or any control or
Mm.
and it's really just an ad revenue sharing situation or something. And like it's funny that there would be a brand problem with Megyn Kelly being associated with Fox, for Megyn Kelly,
There's a lot of drama
who
there,
came
a
from
lot of history
Fox.
there.
It's like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yes.
Right. Speaking of outlets, I want to talk a little bit about drop site news. If you don't mind just giving us an overview of drop site news, we're huge Jamie Scahill fans as well. But I just wanted to make sure that like we talk about it a little bit, and then I also want to talk into some recent developments in Israel and Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy and I and Nausicaa, who was our editor at The Intercept, launched it about back in July, and we're quickly joined by our colleague Maz Hussein, also from The Intercept, and another kind of management side person on The Intercept, Casey, and since have grown out our Mideast bureau and are looking forward to growing a Latin American desk, Africa desk, Asia desk. Um, so we're really focused on the world, but in particular the parts of the world where the U.S. is like pointing its gun, and what the reaction and resistance to that is, and what the effect of it is, and how that plays back here in the U.S. So of course, we also are covering what's going on in D.C. with Musk and his crew. But yeah, we've really started out very heavily print focused, and when I say print, I don't mean actual print paper, just like words strung together in the old newspaper sense, which I think there's still very much a space for, and we know that you're not going to reach an audience directly in the hundreds of millions with print investigations, but you can reach millions, and you also reach the people who are then reaching other people. Like you guys, for instance, like we will do reporting that we hope then is the fodder for interesting podcasts and interesting YouTube shows that exist everywhere. But somebody's got to do the original on the ground reporting and dig up the stuff that then other people
Yeah.
can push out and talk about.
Yeah, we don't have that in us.
And not everybody does, and that's okay.
The writing part, the podcast part, we can absolutely.
Yeah, yes, you clearly got that.
Yeah. So, Brandon, we'll talk a little bit about this. News broke this morning about, well, the New York Times push notification is that Hamas has paused further hostage exchange.
Hmm.
And then if you actually read the article, they mention in the second paragraph it's because they blame Israel for breaking part of the ceasefire, not living up to part of the ceasefire.
Hmm.
Just wondering if you have any POV on this recent development, and if you don't mind, if not, and if so,
Yeah,
you don't mind just sharing your POV on the situation at hand currently.
yeah, and Jeremy has a piece coming out on this at Dropside that may already be up, or it will be up very soon if it's not. Yeah, and basically what's going on is that Hamas is persuaded by Israel's public statements that they have no intention of moving beyond phase one.
Right. Yeah.
The Israeli negotiators are specifically, forbidden from even negotiating the terms of phase two, even though the original agreement says that those negotiations should already be well underway. So they're very explicitly and deliberately doing that, as Hamas is also pointing out. and this is what the Times is referencing, Israel has not lived up to its end of the humanitarian aid bargain. They had said that they would, as a result of striking the deal, they would let in a lot more trucks. And they did that for like a day or two, and now they're not doing it. And so what Netanyahu appears to want is basically a permanent phase one where Israel would remain in the Philadelphia corridor and would would retain its chokehold on aid getting into the Gaza Strip and would block any efforts at reconstruction or demolition removal or anything like that. And with the goal being a strangulation of the population. And I think that Donald Trump's floating of the complete clean out, as he put it, of Gaza, I think it gave Netanyahu more confidence to try to pursue this. That, okay, if I can go another year of making things unlivable, like the word unlivable has to eventually mean something, and eventually so many people will die and suffer that somehow I'll be able to move from this phase to their preferred phase where they do get out. They don't, to achieve their objectives, they wouldn't necessarily need all 1.7 million people to leave. If a couple 100,000 more died and 500,000 left, and you're down to 700,000 or something, then maybe they feel like they can then reoccupy at some point. So it looks like they're trying to basically go to a very explicit war against the civilian population in hopes of winning a war of suffering.
Guys, I have one last question for Ryan before we let him go, but I wanted to let you guys jump in case there's anything else you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on like the economics of like the media you were talking about. It sounds like it's not even about advertising dollars. It sounds like it's just pass-through money from like
Hmm.
Comcast being sent directly to CNN or whoever it is. But there have been a lot of threats to the broadcasting licenses, which give them, as I understand it, like a permanent spot or requirement on cable network packages. Is that the main threat that is being levied here? Because I don't think a lot of people get their news through the airwaves
Right.
anymore, I think. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a serious threat. Um, you're right. You're putting your finger on it. The agreements that they strike with the telecoms are key, and at that level there's politics at play for sure.
Mhm.
But you're right. It's not advertising.
Okay.
Oh, and
And
if you think about it, it makes sense. Like because if the subscription model can add up to such a wealth so quickly for like a Barry Weiss size site, imagine what you pay for your cable and internet bill every month. It's
mhm.
many times more than you're paying for a Substack.
Yeah.
And so then they split that up among the ones who have enough leverage to say, people would be very angry if I was not, part of the package. And in some areas, MSNBC is not, and they're like an add-on that people have to pay extra for. In some areas,
Mhm.
they're included. CNN is almost always included, I think. But yeah, where you are on that list is very political, and in fact, OAN used the used kind of conservative media and the Trump administration and DC lobbyists and members of Congress to try to force cable companies to give them a sweetheart payout.
Mhm.
Even though from my understanding and following that story from the cable companies' perspectives, there wasn't actually that much demand from audiences saying I'll be so livid if I don't have OAN in my basic package.
I imagine
So
those people who are going to see OAN are opting into that $5 extra anyways, like if they
yeah,
really want it.
right. And so they managed to put enough pressure on the cable companies, political pressure that they said, okay, fine, just here, take a payout.
Oh,
Yeah,
they were successful with that.
yeah, they
I
were.
think I remember some people talking about like canceling their cable subscriptions because of something like that,
Yeah,
some program being
I
like
think that I
roped in
think that
there.
was
That's
part of it.
probably,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
Missing
that's what I
OAN.
had.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Dan?
Missing OAN. Oh
No
man.
way.
Ben, did you have anything?
Yeah. I just wanted to, and I know I apologize in advance because this is probably an annoying question that has been in the ether a lot for you. But
No
going back
such
to
thing.
Going back to Gaza is an interesting moment, especially when, Trump had his whole speech of, wanting to make the Riviera of the Middle
Hmm.
East. And it was the first time on my Facebook feed that I saw a lot of liberals upset about Gaza for once
Hmm.
in 15 months. Finally, when Trump does it, people have something to say about it. I was just wondering if you like maybe a general reaction to that of like the liberal left finally feeling free to speak up now that Biden's gone, and also just more generally, do you really think there's effectively a difference with what Trump is doing right now to what a Harris presidency would have actually meant?
Yeah, in fact, in some ways, I mean, I remember thinking in the weeks after October 7th that it was a worst of all worlds situation for Palestinians because they had a Democratic president who's going to give Israel all the diplomatic, political, and military cover that they could possibly ask for, and then they would also have Democratic, base support for
Yeah,
that. Whereas if Trump were in the White House and they would be calling Bibi Trump's best friend and
there'd
remembering
be a resistance. Yeah.
they'd be remembering how Obama and Bibi did not get along at all, and that Netanyahu was basically acting for years as a partisan Republican, and they would have seen what was going on through that lens and would have objected to it, which is just a deeply deplorable way of looking at it, to choose a word, to like value human life based on what it means for your preferred candidate is deplorable. On that question, I think that the difference would be, I think Democrats would not go for a full-on explicit ethnic cleansing. I think there's no chance Democrats propose turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Mediterranean. I also think there's almost no chance that there's even a ceasefire at this point if Kamala Harris is elected.
Yeah.
I would love to hear the argument for why, and I suppose the best argument would be Phil Gordon, her foreign policy guy, is pretty good. He wrote this really good book about how all of our interventions in the Middle East have backfired. If he got a decent position in the White House, he could persuade Harris that, okay, you couldn't break with Biden during the election, but you should do it now, and that Netanyahu needs to be pressured. Like that, but it's so impossible to just kind of conceptualize it happening.
Hmm.
And whereas feels like much more likely that, I think, and from what I heard from Israeli sources, a Trump loss would have collapsed Netanyahu's government very quickly, but that Netanyahu would have then won the next election, and then you'd have months of scrambling, putting together a new government, and during the entire time there would be a low grade war and a continued choke on Gaza. And I think right about now maybe we'd be at the election period, and then Netanyahu would win, and then he'd put together government. So like they would just continue the ethnic cleansing by military means rather than what they're trying to do now, starve the population and force them out.
Hmm.
Ryan, I just want to say thank you for being generous with your time. We really do appreciate it and definitely appreciate your
Yeah,
insights.
thanks for having me
Um,
on. I appreciate it.
I did lie. I have two last questions for you. One, what is your cat's name? Just because I'm a huge cat fan and respect having a black cat.
I have actually black cat brothers. They're in the same. They were bonded when they were born, so we had to take them both.
Can't break up
Uh,
the fam, you
can't
know?
break
Good
up the
man.
Yeah.
fam. That was Potato, and his brother is Tiny Mufasa. My kids named them both.
Very nice. Very good
Very,
Yeah,
names.
very
and the
adorable. I
Lion
love
King, Mufasa's back, so it's
Wait,
cool.
Yeah.
have you seen it? Did you
I
go
have
see
not
it?
seen it yet. I have not.
Okay. I'm skeptical, so I'll look forward to your review on Twitter.
Excellent.
Last question. What could Democrats have done? What could the left have done to prevent Trump winning?
I think a primary would have been a great idea, like an
Hmm.
out of the box idea. Like let the voters choose a good candidate. To
Crazy.
I think a primary that nominated somebody who was not from the Biden administration, it doesn't make it a party that people are in love with, but it makes it a party that people can at least like persuade themselves has some prospect of being better than the current one. Running the exact same one without a primary, I think, just really condemned them to death. And this is not, I said all this and wrote all this consistently for the entire time. So this is not 2020 hindsight. I think it was pretty obvious. And when I would write it, I wouldn't get any real pushback from readers. Like, so I don't think I was saying anything that was, that original or that hard to see at the time. So I think really just that, I think would have done it. Like you get a fairly standard, I think like a J.B. Pritzker, a Gavin Newsom, like any of these like bog Democrats who are not lumped in with Biden Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And I had proposed the idea when it was clear that Biden had to step down. My argument was just do it at the convention. Use what we understand as democracy today, which is the reality TV show. Like use those norms and formats, because that's like people understand, like whether it's Traders or Bravo or whatever, like that there's a give and take with the audience there, where like audiences say things about these reality candidates that it reverberates on the show. People get kicked off the show, whether they get voted off. Sometimes they just get kicked off. Like that's kind of America's bread and circus democracy at this point. And if you did a couple week long primary where you had multiple town halls, you have cameras following these candidates around, they're doing constant straight to cameras, like whoever emerged from that at the convention, I think comes out fairly strong. Now, maybe the structural forces are such that just Trump was unbeatable, but I think that has you in the ball game. And of course, that candidate then has more freedom to say that, they're going to do something different when it comes to the Middle East and Gaza. Whereas Harris, for whatever reason, felt like she couldn't.
They could get temperature checks on certain policy issues too, that way.
Right.
A diversity of opinion. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a novel idea.
Yeah.
I actually kind of
Crazy.
like
Crazy idea. A primary.
I don't know if that ever would have worked. It's too bold.
that. It's way
crazy.
too bold.
It's too big.
Democrats.
You're crazy.
Well, on that note, Ryan, again, thank you so much. We'll be sure to send over a link as soon as the interview is up, but we hope to talk to you again.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Thanks
See you
so
guys.
much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Have a good one. Bye.
That was Ryan Grimm.
That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could listen to that guy for days.
Yeah, he has a really calm way of speaking that is very easy listening.
Yeah, classic newsman.
More chill than we were. I didn't want to talk. I was like, bow down.
Vote for all seasons. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See y'all next week.